Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to Moveset Breakdown. So, originally I was going to do the Valkyrie from For Honor, but I decided to push that back a little bit due to the sudden explosion in popularity of my Vermintide vids. And thank you all very much who have been commenting and saying really nice things. I greatly appreciate it. So this one's for you, as some other content that will be coming up soon. But either way, thanks to Tubechaser for the suggestion to tackle the Bretonnian Longsword moveset of Marcus Gruber, and wow, I gotta say, I really like this moveset. I was instantly impressed, so we've got a lot to talk about here. Now, first and foremost, let's talk about what the weapon is and also what his reason for using the weapon. In case you don't know, normally Marcus's career paths are going to be the mercenary, the huntsman, I believe, and then the knight. So kind of his, normal, fell off the radar, not so great, and his idealized, which is how most of the career paths seem to go. The Grail Knight is a DLC class for him that kind of takes a right turn into weirdness, as I'm sure the lore implications of a guy who has literally raided in Bretonnia and things along those lines suddenly becoming a champion of the ladies a bit strange, but then again, the world's ending, so we're just going to roll with it. But either way, the Bretonnian Longsword has a unique moveset in a couple different ways, and in regards to the way Gruber uses it, however, we can make an assumption here. So, even if Gruber does become a true Grail Knight, kind of out of nowhere, right, he wasn't raised in Bretonnia, so he's still going to fight the way he was trained to fight. And we can presume then that this is a good reflection of how you would fight with a longsword in the Empire. And in fact, considering some of the techniques he uses, which do line up with German techniques, and since the Empire is based off the HRE, it does kind of make sense. But on that note, you might immediately say, okay, so why doesn't he just reuse the Greatsword moveset? Well, there's some differences. A longsword is going to be shorter, it's going to be a little bit more dexterous, I can do some different things with it. Not saying that you can't do exactly the same thing, there are some limitations, but in general, when it comes to using a true, Zweihander or Spadone or things along those lines, you can certainly use some of your longsword knowledge, but it will hamper you more than help you. It's better to learn things that specifically work for that weapon, and vice versa. So, he has kind of a whole new move set. So first and foremost, let's talk about his stance. So, Gruber's going to stand left foot forward, sword kind of down here to the side in sort of a lazy Vermintide. Nothing out of the ordinary here, really. Kind of the same as all heroes when they're holding a two-handed weapon. Now, what's interesting about his longsword mechanics are going to be that he has kind of two different tiers. In fact, this kind of reminds me a bit of For Honor in regards to these tiers. So his first are going to just be his light attacks and his just default block. So for his light attacks, what we're going to see is we're going to see a rising cut from our right side. Now, in regards to where, the kind of angle of this, it seems to be relatively harsh at about a 45, not really getting into 30 territory, just going to be boom and across, and then we're going to return it with just a Mittelhau back to our right side. So that would be just up, down, no problem. Now you notice that my cuts are directed relatively low. There's a reason for that. It's a bit of a fan theory, but since he has the heavies and the lights, and we'll go into it more, I do believe that if you want to, you can kind of play this as Gruber's two different approaches for fighting Skaven and Northmen. So what do I mean by this? Well, if I'm fighting Skaven, who are on average about yay tall, right? Rising cuts make a ton of sense, right? As chopping down, yeah, absolutely, that's still plenty effective, but in regards to dealing with their weapons, which are going to be lower, it makes more sense for me to come from below to get them out of the way with an attack. And furthermore, let's assume that first attack is meant to either knock weapons aside or to basically cut up into the chin, which is fantastic. His second blow is thrown pretty much always at neck level for a Skaven. So, whereas ordinarily, my Mittelhaus would have to be projected at about the level of my own neck to hit my opponent. Here, I can kind of get lazy and just cut more in the middle of my body, and I'm attacking my enemies in a more effective place. And a lot of the gameplay that I saw involved, when you're fighting Skaven, if you just switch into doing your light attacks, you can kind of rip them apart, which is great. However, when it comes to the heavier hitters, we'll change the way we fight. Now, that's not confirmed. That's just a little fun fan theory I came up with, so if you want to, you can play the game that way. But when he's doing just his normal stance, he will occasionally also throw another cut from below, but usually it's going to be from the right, back from the left, and just this kind of sequence. Now, he will also occasionally throw just a straight up right middle huff. But in regards to his block from here, it's just going to be, you know, hands crossed, sword kind of in front of you, video game block. When he receives a blow on it, he will drop into sort of a hanging point, which is always good to see. But, once again, since he's mostly fighting guys that are much, much shorter than him, as I think Kruber is probably close to my height, 6'4", by the way. So, I think him holding his guard kind of down here isn't necessarily the worst thing, it's just not as effective as a guard. But it clearly shows, hey, I'm blocking, so you don't get confused with any other normal thing you hold. But anyway, so that's kind of our light move set. It's just going to be little cuts from above, cuts from below, followed by a mental how, blocking, defending, and then following through with more of that sequence. Now, in regards to his footwork, I'm just using passing step footwork. I'm going to keep doing so for the rest of the vid. But with all of the characters, unless they're standing completely still, their footwork is just kind of whatever you're moving around with. Which, to be fair, in a crazy wild barmy involving rat men and dudes who are literally dying of disease, my footwork's going to be pretty basic too. So occasionally there can be a bit of a disconnect, but usually there will be some sort of passing step with whatever side, usually then followed by a return step. But either way. So now we come into his more unique movement for this, this weapon, which is why I really, really like it. So what you can do is, if you hold a heavy attack, rather than just winding it up then executing, Kruber will actually move into either Ox on his right side, Ox on his left side, or a sort of middle guard that we'll talk about again in a moment, which is basically just Ox kind of still on the right but a little more central. Now, what this does is it will give him protection. So if someone attacks right now, he'll block it and then riposte with his most natural side. So for example, if I guard on the right, dropping into Ox, in comes an attack, or I launch my attack, I will throw a right overhow. And it seems as though his overhow is coming in a little bit wide. Seems like the less time you hold it, the wider it'll be, versus if you hold it for a good long while, it ends up a little bit more sheer, closer to a 30 as opposed to a 45 or wider. Then on the other side, this one pretty much always ends up being a relatively sheer 45 coming straight down, sometimes a 30. But I really, really like this mechanic because, one, it's showing how he can ward people off with the tip, presumably, right? Without him ever actually needing to do anything. I mean, all this is I've dropped into a defensive guard, as Ox is fantastic at defending yourself, because I'm protecting my head, I'm keeping you at bay with my point, and you may say, okay, I'm open down low, which against Skaven would be a problem, but again, that's why I think he fights differently against the little guys, versus this is more for the Northlanders. If they're going to attack below, they're gonna lose their head doing it. So, against, you know, normal size enemies, so Nurgles guys, this makes perfect sense as a guard, right? And then from here, if someone attacks, guard the head, deliver a cut that falls for just naturally, guard the head, cut, no problem, right? Now, what's super, super interesting about this is going to be when he executes his middle block. Now, I don't exactly know what prompts this, as obviously holding down heavy will cause you to just go down to either side, and he's mostly going boom, boom, but sometimes he'll move into a slightly more centralized block, and he sticks his thumb on the blade, which is a really, really cool detail. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'll get close to the camera to show. So we've got the crossguard turned at a 45 degree, not 45, but I'm getting my angles, horizontally, and he's got his thumb on the blade below. Now, what this does, and you can certainly hold a normal Ox this way, but what this does is it widens the surface area directly above your head. So I've turned my crossguard sideways, and putting my thumb on the blade reinforces it, so now it's sitting very naturally in my hand, and I can receive quite a bit of force right there without difficulty. Now, normally, in the German school of fighting, this can mean a couple different things. The first and foremost and we're going to dip into the history here. The first and foremost would be the difference between edge and flat. So, mind you, this is a very deep discussion, and people will be willing to die on hills for one side or the other. I'm just going to give you the basics, right? If your edge is met by the edge of another weapon, it will bite into each other and slightly stick. So, for example, here I am up in Ox with my edge standing upward. If someone cuts at me and I cover, it will stick slightly. Not like, magnetized together, but it will stick just enough that more often than not, you'll feel, oh, rather than leaving this, I can work from it. It's almost like literally having an extra limb, like an extra point of contact in the way it controls. Now, the nice thing about that is that means that, number one, if someone attacks me, I'm going to arrest their motion, which is great. Number two is that, especially if I'm using that in an offensive capability, that means that I can control their weapon very similar to if, my hand was just extended out into my blade. It's literally like having a longer arm almost. The downside of that being, the same is back to you, right? So if, for example, here I am with my edge up, in comes a cut, and I was looking to get away, that can hamper my ability to deliver my cut. I can still do it, but my opponent will get a lot more tactile feedback and can also do more things with that bind state. I mean, that's why it's called the bind, right? And why you can even say, oh, I'm in a bind, right? So that is a property of having your edge forward, right? An alternative to this is to turn your blade sideways. Now, you can do this in a bunch of different circumstances, but in regards to directly with cuts going overhead, what happens now is when a cut comes in, number one, I've widened my guard. So by widening my guard out, I am kind of protecting more overall. And when I personally fenced competitively quite a bit, I would usually land a blow and then retreat in left ox with my guard turned horizontally for just more protection. That was kind of my default, and it worked really, really well. But by widening the guard out, I make it a lot less appealing to attack onto my head, and it's very easy to defend myself on both sides without needing to change guards. So here, I either have to bring my tip across or I have to transition my hands across to really accurately protect myself. Here, I've got kind of 360-degree ability to block, almost, right? Now, the other property about that is that because my flat is there, when an edge hits flat, the description I go with is it feels almost glossy, right? The edge just kind of scampers down the blade in this very strange way. And if you are doing it as an offensive action, so for example, in comes strike, I'm looking to counter strike, then it's great because it feels like I just knock his sword aside, not with a ton of force, just I shear down the blade and I strike my opponent and there's not a whole lot he can do. However, on the defensive side, what that means is someone who is hoping to arrest me, to catch me, all of a sudden, now they're hitting the flat, their blade will start sliding down, whether they want it to or not, which frees me up to do a lot of things. Now, normally when you stand in the thumb grip, what this would allow you to do is from your right side, you'll be able to use the short edge quite easily. So for example, if I'm here, someone cuts at my head, more often than not, that'll push my blade kind of down to my left, and from there, I would deliver a cut with the short edge coming usually from above, though I can also throw it horizontally or even from below, right? Alternatively, I can also, snap the blade up and do things from there with the long edge, but it's very, very good because it basically becomes what's called a bogan, and a bogan being the idea of, from here, in comes cut, step out to defend, and then do whatever you're gonna do. So seeing Kruber take this is really, really awesome, as it makes a lot of sense in my opinion. So when he fights Northlanders, they're pretty much always cutting from above. Be it the big Chaos Warriors, be it the Chosen, be it the Berserkers, be it whatever. They pretty much always throw cuts in from above, and occasionally horizontally, but mostly from above, right? And so Kruber guarding his head against them, warding them off with the point, and then protecting himself not in one way, but in three ways, right? Guarding on his right, guarding on his left, and then turning the flat to set up for strikes on his dominant side. That's really, really cool, and I think it completely flew over a lot of people's heads. But, sword nerds like me are like, yes! But anyway. Now, of course, it doesn't quite work that way. I mean, he still riposts out of it, but the riposte he does is rather than doing a short edge technique, which, to be fair, in armor, it becomes a little bit more difficult to do these. But instead, when he adopts the thumb grip, what we're going to see is he's going to launch a Scheitelhau. So a Scheitelhau literally translates to scalp strike, and it's going to be the idea of me attacking straight down the middle. So my angles of attack are down from right, down from left, up from right, up from left, middle, straight down, and then also straight up. So Gruber so far uses pretty much all of them except for the very bottom one, which is pretty cool to see. So again, more diversity, more versatility with the longsword. But if you pull up into guard from here, his next attack is he's going to push the pommel forward. So push it forward, kind of moving into high Vermintide, and then he's going to just deliver the cut kind of straight down. Now he doesn't cut all the way through, it should be noted. When he cuts from his right or left, he will go ahead and bring the sword fully out of view, and then presumably he'll draw back up and cut again. So what that would look like basically would be the following. So here's Gruber, draw up, cut, draw up, cut, basically. Versus if we were to draw up middle, cut, kind of out in front of us, then we draw up on our left side next. Though sometimes it can come down at a bit more of a left angle, so it seems like he can do slightly either from there. But now, using the Scheitelhaude of this, what do I think of it? It's an interesting choice. I would personally expect to use the short edge more, but if for whatever reason you can't use the short edge, be it his armor, be it whatever, sure, launching the Scheitelhaude out of here is no problem. All I gotta do is push that pommel forward, boom, I'm set up for a cut straight line. So I think it's great. And also, as a big fan of just straight down the middle cuts, especially in gameplay of Vermintide, you're trying to hit those storm vermin right in the head, it's fantastic for that. So really, the only thing Kruber doesn't use with his longsword moveset is a thrust, which, to be fair, when you use his Grail Knight ability, is, he summons in, I think it's supposed to be Excalibur, basically, and he'll do a cut, then a thrust, with his hands turned over. So it's kind of there anyway. But what this means is that now we can start doing some interesting combos, basically, with his stuff. And so we've got combos with him, and then we've got, again, like I said, his two ways of fighting Skaven or Northlanders, at least according to my theory, tinfoil hats on. So against Northlanders, I think it makes great sense for him to adopt that forward guard, to launch attacks that go at head level for your average sized person, to defend himself in a couple different ways, versus when he's just fighting the Skaven, he'll just block out, away from him on a lower line, and it will usually launch cuts going from below or at the middle line against them. I think that makes perfect sense, and I think it makes for a good showcase of how really competent Kruber is, as if we can make some assumptions, and this is again dipping into the history, we can make some assumptions about the fencing culture of the Empire, at least based upon, comparison to the Holy Roman Empire at the time, right? So in regards to, the mid to late 1500s, in the Holy Roman Empire, you have the expansion of the middle class. And so a lot of people that ordinarily wouldn't be fighting with swords like this, or in schools, etc., have access to it. Very, very much in the same way that we can play sports super easily, right? So this meant that a lot of, people who ordinarily would not be soldiers, who were gonna serve in militia, etc., were fighting and training and learning a lot. And if you're interested more in this, you should look up Paulus Hector Meyer, that's M-A-I-R, and then Joachim Meyer, that's M-E-Y-E-R, as those are two contemporaries from that time who have written many works on it. And you look at the lens of not just going to nobles, but also going to the common man, the middle class, and it's a lot of really cool techniques. But basically the point being, Kruber is not only just military trained. In theory, at least based upon what he seems to showcase, he could have learned these things in the army, but I think it's more likely that Kruber learned how to fight with the longsword, at least, in a situation very similar to basically what I do here, right? Going to a effectual within his hometown, learning defense from his neighbors and whatever local master and things like that, and that's a really, really cool showcase. And so to see him apply that diversity is super awesome. But anyway, less talking, more swinging of sword. So now let's see some combos that seem to work really well when you do them. Of course, just drawing up, cut, drawing up, cut, that's fantastic. But one of the ones I've seen kind of used the most is going to be setting up a light from below and then a heavy to come back down, which looks really, really good when you do it. So what that would be is it's a light hunter, right? Then we're going to draw up into the heavy, back down. Light hunter, draw up the heavy, back down. And I've seen this executed just without difficulty and just liquidizing storm vermin. And of course you can do it a couple different ways. You could, for example, do it the other way or what have you, but that's one of the combos that was coming up quite a lot rather. You can, of course, draw up, cut down, middle, things along those lines. Basically, anytime you can combo those sides together and make it look natural, it really takes the choreography up from, just swinging wildly at these hordes to making very smart cuts, very smart decisions, and it gives the player the ability to start creating combinations of their own volition, which in my opinion can take, a relatively basic system of melee in a game and make it far more interesting. So, a competent player could figure out how to do these combos, figure out how to get things going at about the right time. Like, for example, when I play Saltspire or when I play Marcus with the halberd, I'll sometimes throw a cut slightly out of distance, especially with the halberd. I'll throw a cut slightly out of distance to then set up that thrust on an incoming enemy, and things like that, which is really cool, because that's fencing strategy applied to a game that is, basically Left 4 Dead with rats. So, either way, and like I said, I can't necessarily tell 100% what his footwork is supposed to be, but passing step seems like a safe bet. Most of the time, you're going to be just, I'll run around a little bit, right? You're going to be just running around, moving like this, boom, boom, back to guard, heavy, boom, back to here, moving around, boom, boom, we're back, adopt guard, scheitel, we're back. Again, nothing crazy, just decent moveset, honestly. I also really like the skins for the Longsword. They look great, and if they weren't so expensive, I'd get some. But either way, that's going to be my little rambly moveset breakdown for Marcus Gruber's Bretonnian Longsword. We had a lot to talk about, and it was a lot of fun, so I really hope you guys have been enjoying the Vermintide content. You seem to have been doing so, and really encourages me to make more videos when you guys comment like you have been doing, so awesome. If you have any other suggestions, by all means, throw them out. I am really enjoying this, and I will get back to For Honor and other things. If you have other games that you want me to look at, by all means, tell me. I think someone suggested Assassin's Creed Unity. I know I want to tackle Shadow of Mordor / Shadow of War. That'd be a ton of fun. But all these are coming in the future, so otherwise, thank you guys very much for watching, and we will go over some other techniques another time.